Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Abdullah Konte here again with another episode of Win Sports. Talking again, kind of about the draft overall for the Commanders. It's free agency. We've seen all the moves that they've made. So there's been a lot of changes on what people think is going to be, the direction that they go in regards to this team. When it comes to who they're going to pick, right? Like, I mean, they don't have a ton of draft capital, but that first pick is huge. There's a lot of people now talking about trade back. There's a lot of different holes on this team. Obviously, we could talk first about just the direction of where we think that they're going to go. So many people this week have been talking about wide receiver. There's been a lot of, mocks about, is wide receiver the option? And so, you guys have seen me do a couple videos where I do 7 for 7. So I kind of figured I'd do that again, but this is going to be kind of a post free agency, 7 for 7. And granted, free agency is not over. There's still some more additions that could be made. But basically, I kind of wanted to go about it and probably less of just a 7 people, but more like 7 scenarios. And I'll get more into detail about that specifically. But I mean, the first thing, is talking about, the changes that they've made. They did a lot addressing edge, getting Caleb Chason, Adafwe Owe, Amenahu from the Chiefs. They very much addressed the defense overall. Leon Chanel, they got Nick Cross in the secondary, and they made a lot of moves, Rashad White, they got some receivers. There's nothing special. They missed out on Pierce. They missed out on Dobbs. So essentially what it kind of looks like is that they wanted to go in an angle of getting as many players as possible so that they can go, I think, best player available in the draft. But, they missed on some people. So there are some holes, right? So if you were to talk about the biggest concern here or the biggest, places that are of need on this team, you'd have to say that receiver is probably number one at this point, right? Corner could be another one that you would talk about, but the receiving group is very, very bare. I mean, everybody's waiting for the Ayuk thing, and I think people thought the Ayuk thing would happen by now. San Francisco's, dragging their feet with that. I think they're just kind of, I know there's rumors that they want a 7th round pick. I'd just be shocked if anybody makes that trade because they got to eat that contract too, and I just don't see why they would do that. I think everybody's just kind of waiting for him to get cut. And for Ayuk, as a guy who didn't want to play for them and has been very adamant that he really just wants to play in DC, I don't know who would make that trade overall right now. There's just not enough information about what happened with that relationship. And then but they just didn't really grab anybody else. They grabbed De'Ami Brown to come back, which I think was a good deal. You guys know I've mentioned that. I've been mentioning that for weeks now, that I think that was something that could happen. They got Van Jefferson, but outside of that, they didn't really grab anybody. I mean, they did get Chig Okonkwo at tight end to help in the passing game, but they really do need a second receiver. They don't really have a second, and you can argue they don't really have a third either. If you want to say that Treylon Burks or Luke McCaffrey or Jalen Lane is that third receiver, sure. I just don't know if we've had any real belief that they are yet. They have potential to be, but they're just, not quite there yet, right? So basically, there's some holes on this team. At corner, too, they didn't really address corner much. They were able to get Amik Robertson. But outside of that, there is a lot of debate that do they have two true outside corners? Sanders Still as well as Meek are guys who both can play a little bit inside and outside, but are they both inside guys? Is Sanders Still really good enough to play outside? Now, I know Durante Jones's defense, if it's similar to Brian Flores's, which we believe so, actually gives kind of a little bit of relief to the corners as well. With so much pressure being brought in, you can spend more, and I think that's kind of the strategy of spending more and focusing more on the pass rush than the back end, at least on the corner side of things. So it looks like there is a element of they're very much going to address receiver. Or at least that's what everybody's saying. But I think this is where my argument comes from, is that, look, I'm not saying that there isn't a big need. I think it's very adamant, or very obvious that the biggest need on this team right now is wide receiver. But we've known that AP doesn't really just go for, the need. He goes for best player available. We saw it, for example, last year. Everybody was convinced that they were going edge in that first pick in the first round. I was convinced completely. I was watching a lot of edge film, and guess what? They didn't draft an edge the whole draft, right? Like, they didn't get any of them. They ended up going with Connerly and then with Amos in the second round. They didn't trade back, so they didn't have, I think, a third rounder that year. So it just kind of shows that, like, it doesn't necessarily mean just because there's a big need that they're going that position. Another example is when they drafted Johnny Newton. When they drafted Johnny Newton, that was a shock to everybody, because granted, I mean, he was a guy who was supposed to be, I think he was top 10 or top 11 in the PFF that year, but had, a knee injury that kind of pushed him down. So they went best player available. And at that point they had, Jonathan Allen, they had Deron Payne. They had some depth at D tackle that they didn't really need to go Johnny Newton, but they decided, hey, like, this guy's just too good to pass up on. So, basically I just feel like, let's have a discussion about who we really believe is going to be that pick. And so, I've done this a couple times before, and so I was just going to kind of do it again. This might be the last time I do it, because I just, things can change between now and the draft, but like, ultimately I'm just ready to kind of wait for the draft to happen. But I do think that the criteria the way the mock drafts are going and the way we feel like people are getting positioned, like, it's definitely changed since the beginning of free agency, right? So, look, my criteria on how I decide who are the top seven people that I think that could potentially be that pick at number 7 are based upon, just the number one thing is likelihood of them being there. It's some of these guys, like, if Arvo Reese and Caleb Downs are both there, they're going to pick Arvo Reese. But is Arvo Reese actually going to be there? I don't think so, right? Like, that's one of them. But it's basically the likelihood, positional value, the need, and then also just like that commander tag, thing. I mean, like, it is an element. I think it plays its favor in some cases and not so much in others. So we'll see. So basically, I like to do honorable mention, and these are, like I said, it's going to be more of 7 scenarios. So the first one, and it's really just for the honorable mention, is the scenarios if they were to trade back, right? Like, I think it is possible that they could trade back and feel comfortable with that. I still don't know if there's going to be any trade partners to move up, but if they do have a trade partner to move up, players I think that they can get, like, in the later part of the first round, Dylan Thieneman, the free safety from Oregon, he ran like a 4.3. I mean, this kid is a beast. He was great at Purdue, transferred over to Oregon. Really, really strong player. And, for those who are like, hey, they got some safety help with Nick Cross, they still do need a free safety. I think that even though they believe Quan can play that role in some capacity, I don't know if they believe he's a starter, or at least he struggled enough last year that they might want to consider getting a starting free safety, and Thieneman would be that guy. Denzel Boston, the wide receiver, since we are talking receivers in this, he's a really strong, taller receiver, son of David Boston, who played at Ohio State, I believe. And just strong player, very underrated receiver. If we're talking about all the receivers in general, I think he's one of the most underrated receivers there. And then still Jamad McCoy. I don't know how far Jamad McCoy falls. He didn't test anything at the combine. We still don't know where his knee is at, but he is just such a dynamic player that if you were trying to trade back and still get a quality top 10 player, you could get him if his knee gets back to form. So those are my 3 honorable mentions. So my first, number 7, is the first scenario is if and one of the edges fall. So it would be Reese or Bailey, right? Reese or Bailey, Arvell Reese, David Bailey. There have been some mock drafts that have had one of those guys falling. I just don't see it happening. I think that, these mock drafts are starting to get to this point where there is a little bit of player fatigue and just people trying to be different overall. I just feel like with David Bailey and Arvell Reese, they both just did so well at the combine and just have such high promise that I just feel like it's going to be hard for them to get past those first, 6 teams. And granted, it's really 5 teams because Las Vegas is picking Fernando Mendoza. So it's really 5 teams that they would have to get past. And it's possible that one of them maybe gets past. I don't think both of them will. I think the biggest thing is Arizona. Arizona is the one that I feel like if they pass on a D lineman, then you could see like a little bit more of a slide. But it just seems unlikely that one of them will be there. I feel like the likelihood of either one of those guys being there is just not high. But obviously, if they're there, they would be very considered because they're just elite pass rushers, and you just don't pass up on elite pass rush ability, right? Number 6, I have as Bane because I think that Bane. Not necessarily that I think Bane is not going to get picked before. I think Bane might slide a little bit. I just don't know, how well he fits with this defense. I think he can because I think he could play a little inside and outside. But I don't know if the arm length is an issue. It didn't seem like it was an issue for Adam Peters when he was talking about, he mentioned the arm length thing, I think, in his press conference at the Combine. But is he going to be there? Is he, a high level rusher or player that they feel like, hey, no matter what, we're going to grab it? There was some talks that they are going to grab whatever. If one of those 3 guys is there, that's going to be the pick. But that was things that were said before, what they did in free agency. So I don't know if they still feel that way. You can never have enough pass rushers. So it's possible. I don't know if that's the pick. I would say that there are other people that I think I would choose higher instead. Number 5 I have is Mansour Delane. And it's mainly because I think that, he could also be a person that potentially could be like a trade back candidate, because I don't know if he for sure goes in the top 10, if he goes in the top 9, like, if they trade with like Kansas City or somebody, or, Cincinnati or something, just move a few spots back, they could maybe still grab him. He's from this area, really, really talented corner. I like him and Jermod McCoy. I feel like he is a smarter play if you're going to go for corner, just because he is healthy. And I know they did a 30, one of the top 30 visits or whatever with him. And so they clearly like the guy. They interviewed him, I think, at the Combine as well. So they like the kid, and he is a talented player. If they really are trying to address corner in the draft, I feel like you might want to snag one of these top tiered corners at the early part of the draft, and I think he'll be there. It would be very unlikely that he would go above pick number 7, so I think he's very much an option at 7. So my number 4 pick is Jeremiah Love, and he was number 1 on the list last time I did this, but he just kind of did too well at the Combine. And I think that Tennessee, from, I've talked to some people and also just seeing the energy that Tennessee is kind of moving with, it just seems like Tennessee is going to find an offensive answer, somebody to complement Cam Ward, which is exactly what Commanders fans want for Jaden, is the complimentary back to go with him. And so they probably have the same idea, which is why everybody just kind of feels like he's going to be the pick. Now, there's also talk that if he doesn't get picked there, that the Giants are going to pick him. And I think that's smart too, because I think, as much as they have Scadaboo and Tyron Tracy or whatever, like, I just feel like Love is much better than both of those guys. You might want to just take him. So I do think if he gets to 7, that's the pick. If he gets to 7, they're going to pick him, I think. I would be very surprised if he's not the pick if he gets to 7. I just don't think he's going to get there, which is why he's not higher on the list, right? The number 3 scenario is the wide receivers, man. Like, and the reason why I'll talk about all 3 of them, but the reason why there's not just a specific guy is because it's really just your preference, right? Like, I feel like there, as we've seen so many people, I watch a lot of people talk about this week, and there's been so much discussion on this receiver thing, and it's like, yeah, like either you are a Tate fan because you love his dynamic ability to, run routes and be a deep threat. You like Tyson because he just has all the tools, has great separation when it comes to his routes. Or you like Mekhi Lemon in the slot, who reminds a lot of people of Amon-Ra St. Brown and JSN. Like my feeling is Tyson, then Tate, then Lemon. I think Tyson's the most dynamic player. I think his ability to, find separation is unbelievable. And I just think he has the highest promise out of the three. I love Tate. Tate's probably my favorite out of the three. I just like the way Tate plays. But I do think that there is this element of like, did he ball out really well because he had Jeremiah Smith on the other side? I mean, look, every Ohio State receiver plays well, so I'm not reading too much into that. But and Lemon, I'm not the biggest fan of Mekhi Lemon, but a lot of people love him, and I do think if you're looking for a slot player, he's the pick. So those are one of those three guys. One of them is going to be available, if not all three of them. There is this notion that Tate is possibly going to go higher than that, maybe at 5 with the Giants. I don't know, but that's my thought. Is that I know receiver is a position of need. I still think that they're going best player available, and I don't think these receivers is as good as the two guys that I have ahead of them, right? And I actually think there's a good amount of guys. I don't know if these receivers are, but there is a mix of best player available plus the need that you have to really consider, right? So my number 2 player that I have is Sonny Styles, and I think that they have addressed linebacker a little bit, but they don't have a green dot guy. They don't have a guy in the middle that I feel like, I mean, maybe Jordan McGee can be that guy. Maybe they bring back Bobby. I don't know. They need some kind of leadership. And Sonny Styles is super smart. He's been a leader on that team for a long time. He is a green dot type player for sure. Like, if they grab him here, he's definitely going to be that leader that they're expecting. If he's going to be kind of like that Leonard Warner player right in the middle that can cover the field. He doesn't miss a lot of tackles, which is similar to Bobby, which, if that's the real reason why they love Bobby so much, they're going to love this guy, and he's going to be younger and able to do that. And yeah, like, if we're talking about commander tag, I mean, if he definitely is a guy I think has the commander tag, right? Like, I think he exudes, confidence and seems extremely intelligent, and just has that captain kind of vibe. So I feel like this is somebody that they would really be gravitating towards overall. And so he's my number 2 guy, and he basically is very similar to the number 1 guy. And so I've had Caleb Downs in like the top 2, and every time I've done this, he's my number 1 player this time. And I know that, like, I can't even complain, or I mean, I can't lie and say that I'm not a little biased just because he's my favorite player in this draft. But I have him at number 1 because I also think, he's a guy who is going to have that commander tag. Like, there's no way Caleb Downs doesn't have the commander tag. He has everything that these guys look for. One of the articles that I read with John Keim when he interviewed Dan Quinn about all 4 of the Ohio State players, he was talking about Downs so much about how much his intelligence showed on the field as well as in person. Basically how his ceiling is, his floor is so high. I mean, he was talking about Downs, even though he was talking about each player. And when they were talking about, I think, Sonny Styles, he had mentioned Downs in that too. And so it's clear that I think DQ is a fan of basically a fan of Downs. And as a guy who came and coached the Legion of Boom, it's clear he has an affinity for DBs and safeties, which also Durante Jones does, because he's, the pass game coordinator, was in charge of DBs and stuff when he was in Minnesota. Clearly they appreciate I think they appreciate the safety position more than anyone else. And when you think about Matt Patricia and how much he's talked about how they catered that defense to Caleb Downs being that leader, this team needs the opposite of Jaden Daniels on the other side. They need somebody that is going to be that leader for this team on the other end. And that's why I personally really still believe that Caleb Downs is the pick right now. I know that there is elements of like, yeah, they need a receiver. I do think they need to address receiver. I would still like them to try to go trade for somebody. I know they don't have a lot of draft capital, so maybe they use some future picks in 2027. I know no one wants to really use those because it's a really strong class. But if they can't trade for somebody, they really need to address it some way, somehow, whether it's the third round pick, maybe Elijah Surratt or something in the third round. But I just think that if I was to see Caleb Downs and Sonny Styles there in, at 7, it would be hard for me if I was making this decision to pass up those two guys for one of the receivers, even though I know receiver is a big need. And so we'll see. I mean, look, Mel Kiper Jr. had, I think, Sonny Styles going to the Commanders in his mock draft. Daniel Jeremiah, who did Daniel Jeremiah have? He had he had Ruben Bain going to it. So it's clear that even though there's this notion that receiver is a big need, people are still, pairing these guys to pairing some different defensive guys to this team. So that's my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think. I mean, honestly, if you have a number one guy that you feel like they just cannot pass up on, let me know who it is. I just think they really need a leader on this defense. I know that we don't want to see Jaden with nothing out there. They definitely need to try to bring him more help. And I think they tried to do that with Che. They did Rashad Wright, but they still need a little bit more. So I would like them to still bring some people. But at the end of the day, they really need to establish who is going to be that green dot guy, who's going to lead this team for a long time. And I think everybody's analysis of Caleb Downs is that he has the ability to be a Hall of Fame type player, a guy who's going to be leading your team for about 10 years or more. So that's who I would pick. Let me know what you guys think. Thank you guys for so much love, man, in the last few days. I did the interview with Rio. Rio, thank you so much for the love, man. He's been shouting us out. People have been gravitating over here a little bit more. Obviously with the uniforms thing as well. We appreciate anybody who's here, to rock with us. We have more and more content. We'll be at, I can't wait for training camp and rookie camp and all that stuff. That's when I think this channel will grow even more, because we'll be there, watching the practice, being able to give you guys updates. So, if you like what we're doing, please like, subscribe. If you have any questions or, comments and, want to join this conversation, feel free to leave us some comments down below. All right. Thank you all. Peace.